Evidence. You're one of the national coordinators of Students for Palestine, correct?
I am.
And you've been involved in that organisation since 2019?
Yes, I have.
And that consists of student collectives on at least 21 campuses across Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Students for Palestine was involved in establishing encampments across a number of universities, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Including the one at Sydney University?
That's correct.
As well as a number of others, including the one at Deakin University?
That's correct, yes.
And could you just describe for us in general terms what the aims of Students for Palestine are?
Well, Students for Palestine is a pro-Palestine organisation on campuses that was set up in the aftermath of Israel's 2008-2009 assault on Gaza. Our aims are to demand a free Palestine from the river to the sea, to demand freedom for Palestinians, to formal equality in their homelands, and to organise activism and advocacy on campuses for that purpose.
And you describe Students for Palestine as the primary university campaign group leading the Palestine movement on campus in recent years, correct?
That's true. On the vast majority of campuses, we've been the main organisation.
And you are Jewish?
Yes.
You also set out in your statement how you too have lost family in the Holocaust.
That's true, and it's one of the things that animates my sense that I have to fight for justice in Palestine, because, you know, I think that legacy demands me to say never again anywhere, and right now that means opposing the genocide in Gaza.
You began your studies at the University of Sydney in 2018?
I did, yes.
And you graduated in 2024 and you're now enrolled to study another degree at UTS, is that right?
That's correct.
And you personally were one of the organisers of the Gaza Solidarity Encampment at the University of Sydney in 2024, correct?
I was, yes.
Now, the university encampment movement really started in the United States, is that your understanding?
It did at Columbia University in the United States, where students set up tents on the lawns there to protest their university's ties with the state of Israel and its genocide.
And it was the example in the United States that inspired you to do the same thing in Australia?
It was the example in the United States, but also a sense that what was happening in Gaza was rapidly escalating, and that our politicians and the media in our country had been attempting to silence or not voice criticism of Israel. I recall in early 2024 sitting and listening to the voice of a 6-year-old Palestinian girl, Hind Rajab, as she called the Red Crescent to cry for help. And she was in a car where 5 of her family members had been killed. It was later found that that car had been shot 355 times. She called for help from the Red Crescent, and her body and the bodies of the 2 medics in the Red Crescent van that was sent to assist her were not found until over a week later, when it was possible to recover them. And it was that instance, but also many others like it, which compelled us to set up the encampments, because we felt something had to be done to draw more attention to what was going on in Gaza.
And the encampment at the University of Sydney, was that one of the first in Australia?
It was the first in Australia.
And while it was established by yourself and others at Students for Palestine, it drew people from a range of different societies and clubs on campus, is that right?
It did, yeah. It had wide involvement from all sorts of different clubs on campus, from, you know, the Students Representatives Council, from community Jewish groups that supported Palestine as well over the course of the encampment.
And when you say Jewish community groups, you're referring to community groups that weren't associated with the university but external to it, is that right?
That's right, yeah. So groups like the Tzedek Collective who came and helped organise a Shabbat event at the encampment, groups like Jews Against the Occupation 48 who came and were part of our protests on campus.
And were you aware of any other organisations external to the university being involved in that encampment?
There were, pro-Palestine organisations that put out information about the encampment, but the people who camped were students and the groups that were involved in the kind of organising of the encamp, primarily Students for Palestine, but also other student groups.
Have you been listening to the evidence throughout the course of today?
I have, yes.
And there was some suggestion of a possible connection between the Students for Palestine encampment and Hizb ut-Tahrir. Are you aware of any involvement of that organisation in the encampment while you were there?
No, this group was not involved in any kind of formal organisational sense.
When you say not in a formal organisational sense, were you aware of members attending the encampment from time to time in a more informal sense?
I wasn't aware of this.
And so the encampment involved the setting up of a number of tents on the main quad at Sydney University.
Yes, that's correct.
And a number of people slept the night there.
We did, yes.
And for how long did the encampment run?
I would check the exact dates, but matter of weeks, and different groups were involved for different lengths of time.
Was it about 23 April to 24 June 2024? Does that sound right?
That sounds right.
Okay. And in terms of the number of tents, it reached over 100 tents at one point. Is that fair
It
to
did
say?
reach over 100 tents by our count and the university's count as well.
Okay. And could you just explain to us, from your perspective, what the importance of encampments are as a form of protest as opposed to other forms of protest?
Well, we had been organising other forms of protest on campus before 2023, peaceful protests of a kind of regular demonstration nature. But we had reached a point in 2024 where Israel had begun to systematically ethnically cleanse Palestinians, to blockade food and water, and we felt there had been no action by the Australian government to do anything about this. The universities themselves maintained ties with weapons companies, doing research and development, but in some cases also investing in these weapons companies, and that we had to do something more. We felt there was some sense of humanity that meant it was not enough to just have a protest once a week, although those protests, of course, were important. But we had to create a visible and noticeable demonstration of our opposition to these crimes. And we were successful in that in a way, although not in changing the university's policies. Suddenly, the issue of Palestine was back in the media again. We were moved by reports of Palestinian children who were watching the encampments around the world from Gaza, who held up signs saying they'd seen them. I received a message from a former Students for Palestine activist who had moved back to the West Bank and was living there, and who said that he had seen the encampment at Sydney University and its protests and taken courage and hope from that in a situation where there were unbearable atrocities being carried out.
You make the point in your statement that, from your perspective, one point of protest is to cause an element of disruption and even discomfort to those observing.
I think the intention of protests is often to cause discomfort to those in power in particular, to create for the university administration a sense that we were not happy with the situation going on as it was, that we felt there was this sort of normality to our university lives which didn't reflect what was going on in the world, and that we had some obligation to, demonstrate some opposition to that kind of sense of normality. I
take it you'd agree that where protest does cross the line into anti-Semitic, Islamophobic or other racist conduct, that's going too far in exercising one's right to protest.
Of course, and Students for Palestine and the encampment movement also made this a very clear point in our manifesto of the encampments, we stated right from the beginning that we stood against all forms of discrimination and racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and so on. And those things were important to us. I think the very nature of the encampments themselves was a form of anti-racist protest. I mean, what we were seeing going on was the most extreme anti-Palestinian racism, as well as a growth in, that on our own campuses, Islamophobia and so on. And so the encampments were were created with the intent to demonstrate our opposition to that racism that was being carried out in the form of genocide.
And of course, you make the point that criticism of Israel is not inherently anti-Semitic.
Yes, we've always very clearly made that point, that the state of Israel is not inherently tied to Jewish people, and that its actions are not because of Jewish people, that it's a political project, and that the ideology that is behind it is a political ideology.
And it's also your position that making the claim that Israel is engaging in genocide in Gaza, likewise, is not inherently anti-Semitic.
No, in fact, I think making the claim that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza is necessary. I mean, this is something that we have heard the United Nations commissions of inquiry find, the International Association of Genocide Scholars. These organisations have found that what Israel is doing in their eyes is a genocide. And in Australian society at the time of the encampments and today, there has been denial of this fact. There was, denial when we set up the camps of what was going on in Gaza. We've heard at this commission evidence put to us, statements put to us by the anti-Semitism envoy that questions even the number of deaths in Gaza, which, the United Nations and also Israeli forces themselves have acknowledged is 70,000 or more at this point. And that is of deep concern to us, and we think it is an instance of genocide denial and of racism.
Would you agree that holding the Jewish people collectively responsible for the actions of the government of Israel is anti-Semitic?
I would agree with that. I think it's a point that the Palestine movement has been trying to make, that this is not to do with Judaism. I think the problem we've come up against is that there has been an argument put to us both by Israeli politicians and furthered by the actions of Australian politicians that this is the case, that there is some inherent link. I mean, in the wake of the atrocities at Bondi, the Israeli president was invited to this country. This is a political figure who was invited to this country as though that was somehow representative of Jewish people. And we see that as extremely problematic because it's creating an association that we don't believe exists between Jewish people and what the state of Israel is doing. I mean, the Israeli president has signed bombs bound for Gaza. That is, something we want to distance from Jewish people.
So is your position then that it's wrong to assume that all Jewish people identify with the state of Israel, and likewise wrong to assume that all Jewish people are Zionist?
I think that's our contention, yes.
Indeed, you yourself are Jewish but are not Zionist and certainly do not identify with the state of Israel. Is that fair?
That's fair, and I think it's actually very important to me that the history of my family, which my grandmother lost every living relative in the Holocaust, gives me a sense that being Jewish should mean fighting for that to be the end of genocide forever. That's not the reality in the world we face today, and so I feel compelled to be part of the Palestine movement. But yes, I think it's important to draw a distinction between Zionism and Judaism and the state of Israel.
Did you hear the evidence of Liat this morning?
I did, yes.
Now, she gave some examples of being called a baby killer and a genocide supporter, and I'm not suggesting that it was individuals from Students for Palestine that necessarily made those comments, but I take it you would agree that those sorts of comments cross the line and are inappropriate?
I mean, I don't think it's fair to make baseless accusations, nor do I think that every person who's a Zionist is responsible for the actions of the Israeli forces, but it does call into question whether or not she opposes a genocide that's going on in Gaza. And so, I think drawing a distinction between those things is very important. To say that somebody is a genocide supporter is not an anti-Semitic attack if that person indeed supports a genocide.
But in circumstances where a person may have no idea about the position a Jewish person or even a Zionist takes on the actions of the government of Israel, I take it in that circumstance you would accept it's inappropriate to label someone a genocide supporter.
I don't think that just because somebody is Jewish, obviously they should be labelled a supporter of the state of Israel and its genocide. I do think that Zionism in itself is an ideology which supports the existence of the state of Israel, and I think that is a racist project.
But you're not suggesting all Zionists support genocide, are you?
I'm suggesting that Zionists, insofar as they support the state of Israel, support a racist project.
Can I also ask you about some of the language that's been used in terms of the chants? While you participated in the encampment at the University of Sydney, did you witness some people chanting from the river to the sea from time to time?
I did, yes, and I chanted it myself.
And what is your interpretation of that phrase?
To me, from the river to the sea, and the conclusion of it, which is Palestine will be free, is a call for an end to what is happening in Gaza right now, which is the systematic starvation, the bombardment, the genocide being carried out against those people. It's a call for freedom for Palestinians within Israeli borders who do not have the same rights as Jewish citizens. It's a call for freedoms of Palestinians in the West Bank who, in many cases, are facing the expansion of settlements by force, facing the theft of their land and homes. It's a call for freedom from the river to the sea, from all of those forms of oppression.
You're aware that some members of the Jewish community interpret that as a call for the forced removal of Jewish people from Israel or even genocide? You're aware of that interpretation?
I'm aware of that interpretation.
And you're aware that for some members of the Jewish community that phrase causes them deep hurt and even fear? You're aware of that?
I'm aware that for some people that might be experienced that way.
And so whether that phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, whether or not it's characterised as anti-Semitic or not, in circumstances where it has been shown to cause deep hurt and even fear for some members of the Jewish community, what do you say to the suggestion that the pro-Palestinian movement should find different language to convey their point?
I mean, to start with, the idea that a call for freedom is actually a racist call for genocide is a smear on the Palestine movement, which is opposing the systematic denial of rights to Palestinians. I mean, this is a call for freedom from oppression that has been going on for decades. I find it offensive when there is actually a genocide going on and it is being carried out by the Israeli state against Palestinians, something which is regularly forgotten, that our side are the ones calling for a genocide. We are calling for the ability of all peoples to live free from discrimination, regardless of their race or religion, in this land. That's our call, and that's a call against genocide, against apartheid, against racism. That some people might be willing to misinterpret this, I think, is an attempt to slander the Palestine movement. On the other hand, I don't think the legitimacy of social justice movements rests on them never offending anyone. I mean, to take the civil rights movement, for example, I'm sure there were any number of racist white people who claimed that it was threatening to them to have black people in their communities when busing was going on, or who claimed that they were afraid for their children's safety when they were being bussed. You know, like, these examples demonstrate, I think, that the primary concern in a democracy when we're talking about free speech cannot be simply whether somebody's feelings will be hurt by something or not.
But you understand that they are saying not just that their feelings are hurt, but they're actually fearful and feel unsafe. Does that change the balancing from your perspective?
I don't think the Palestine movement is responsible for anyone's lack of safety. We're the ones demanding an end to the enormous violence that is going on in the world today, that is backed up by the Australian government, that is backed up by our educational institutions. We are the ones calling for an end to violence. We are the ones calling for an anti-racist movement. And you know, to interpret it otherwise, I think, can only be viewed as an attempt to defend Israel and its actions.
The phrase globalise the Intifada, I take it you've chanted that as well from time to time?
Yes, I have.
And what about the phrase, there's only one solution, Intifada revolution? Have you used that before?
I have used that.
And what is your interpretation of that phrase, there's only one solution, the Intifada revolution?
Well, the thing we're chanting about in that situation is to say there is one solution, one option for people as an alternative to Israel's oppression, as an alternative to, you know, the situations I've described in Gaza and the West Bank and so on, that there is one way forward, and it's through resistance, civil disobedience, protests, and that's the phrase that we're using to talk, that's what we're talking about when we use this phrase.
And I take it you're aware that for some members of the Jewish community, they interpret that reference to Intifada as a reference to the first and second Intifada, during which there were a series of terrorist attacks against Israel and the people in it. You're aware of that interpretation?
I'm aware of that interpretation.
And in that context, you're aware that for some members of the Jewish community, they interpret that phrase as a call to violence against Jewish people. You're aware of that interpretation?
I mean, to put into context what the Intifadas were, they were acts of mass resistance by Palestinians to their oppression. These were, you know, the first Intifada involved mass strikes, mass protests. It was the Palestinians exercising their right to oppose the fact that they were being forced off their lands, that they were facing Israeli bombardment, shootings. I mean, the first Intifada was started actually when Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces at a checkpoint. This is the events that are being referred to. And I think those events were important in Palestinian history. I mean, they're deeply traumatic for many Palestinians who had family members lose their lives in those periods. But they're a call for Palestinians and those around the world to exercise their right to push back when the institutions of our society are supporting genocide.
Ms. Johnson, I understand what you say about the first Intifada. The second Intifada involved a series of suicide bombings within Israel that did put the community in terror. Can you see, against that background, how upsetting it is for members of the Jewish community who have perhaps relatives in Israel to hear the chant to globalise the Intifada? For them it might mean violence as opposed to a shaking off in light of the second Intifada.
Well, my response to that is that I don't hold movements for the justice of the oppressed to a standard that says there can never be any violence. I mean, to talk about the end of apartheid in South Africa, there was, of course, violent resistance as well as mass civil disobedience, non-violent resistance. And I think in a context where Palestinians have been put in a concentration camp in Gaza, or at the time were facing massive oppression in Gaza and the expansion of settlements and so on in the West Bank, that Intifada was also a legitimate act of resistance by a people under occupation.
When you chant only one solution, intifada revolution. Are you aware that for some members of the Jewish community, that language of one solution echoes the final solution adopted by the Nazis in the Holocaust?
I'm aware that that may be interpreted in that way, but I think it's a deliberate misinterpretation of what we're saying. As I've said, we are the ones standing up against a genocide that is currently going on, and we're saying that the solution, the way to end that genocide, is by standing up to it. And I think, in a way, it raises that no matter what slogans our movement raises, whether they be one solution or intifada or resistance, those things are turned into controversial words and phrases by people who oppose our movement for justice. At the university I go to, the word genocide was banned. If we can't even speak the truth about a genocide that's going on, it's difficult to see what phrases we could use to call for justice for Palestinians.
What about Free Palestine Now?
I am for freeing Palestine now. I think that would involve, giving everyone who lives in this region the rights to equality, to democracy, and so yes, I'm for freeing Palestine now.
But I mean, isn't that an alternative phrase that wouldn't strike the same level of hurt and fear in the Jewish community?
I'm not sure if we can say that, given that every other phrase that we do use is turned into a controversy. I mean, I think the example of genocide is a useful one. This is not even a call for resistance. It's just a description of what is happening, which the UN has found to be happening. And even that word in some places has been banned. So the idea that we could just pick another phrase, I think, one, is untrue, and two, I don't think there is an issue per se with any of the phrases that we are raising. These are not racist phrases, they're anti-racist ones.
At paragraph 22 of your statement, you observe that as a Jewish person participating in encampments, you yourself never experienced any anti-Semitism.
That's
right?
true.
And you've also noted that at times the encampment was a place for intercultural engagements, such as the Shabbat dinner you mentioned earlier.
That's true, and I felt in many ways welcomed into the encampment.
You also mentioned that the Tzedek collective attended the encampment. They're an anti-Zionist Jewish group, is that a fair description?
That's correct, yes.
And the Jews against the occupation 48 also attended the encampment from time to time. Is it fair to say they're also an anti-Zionist Jewish group?
That's correct, and we were glad to have their involvement because, like I've said, we have made it an important part of our movement to show that there is a distinction between Judaism and the crimes of the State of Israel.
Were there ever any occasions where Zionist Jewish groups were welcomed into the encampment to discuss their perspectives on the conflict?
At Sydney University, I'm not aware that we ever had it put to us that there should be some formal engagement. I know on other campuses there were discussions and debates that went on between Zionist and anti-Zionist groups.
You've also noted at paragraph 18 of your statement some incidents where there were incursions into the encampment by other groups, is that right?
There were incursions into the encampment by other groups. We believe that these groups were largely not students. They were violent at times. At Adelaide University, for example, they came to the encampment and twice threw homemade firecrackers onto the tents from a roof of students at that encampment. At Monash University, groups of middle-aged men came, for instance, on the first night of the encampment. They damaged property. They, made intimidating statements towards members of the encampment. And at Deakin, people in balaclavas came in an attempt to intimidate us, yes.
And I take it your position is that regardless of what perspective you have on the conflict, whether you're part of the encampment or not part of the encampment, that sort of physically intimidating or threatening conduct is crossing the line.
Yes.
And that it's important for everyone on both sides of this debate to express their views with respect and without resorting to measures of that kind.
I believe it's a part of free speech that people should be able to express their views freely in that way.
but without resorting to that sort of intimidatory conduct.
Yeah.
Would you agree? At paragraph 31 of your statement, you've described some of the restrictions that have been imposed at various universities following the encampment period, and you refer to, among other universities, the restrictions imposed by the University of Sydney, requiring notification to be given for protest action. Is that right?
That's right.
And you expressed the view that those restrictions have nothing to do with protecting Jewish safety, but have severely impacted the ability to speak freely on university campuses. That's your view?
That's my view. I believe it's a tenet of free speech and freedom of expression that we are able in this country to express our opposition to institutions when they especially when they are complicit in genocide. And this relates to Palestine, but many other issues. The idea that we would have to apply to permission from the people that we are protesting against, who are currently doing research for weapons companies involved in supplying a genocide, is extremely disturbing to me. And I think is a breach of our right to oppose crimes against humanity.
You're aware that under the University of Sydney's campus access policy, it says for protests, approval is not required, but organisers must notify us of planned demonstrations as soon as possible and no later than when first communicated to people other than organisers. It's difficult to see how that requirement imposes any real restriction on freedom of speech. Would you agree?
That's now the case at the University of Sydney, that you don't require approval, although on other campuses you do, and the university reserves the right to withdraw their approval for protests on other bases. And so, you know, this is part of a broader attack, I think, that's gone on civil liberties across the country, where we are seeing universities where particular phrases are banned, and I think what remains at the University of Sydney is a culture where we are still essentially having to tell the uni in advance of what we're doing, our opposition to our intention to protest them, and it creates a situation where we don't have full freedom of expression.
What do you say to the suggestion that these sorts of restrictions on protest activity are simply designed so that the universities have advance notice of such protest activity and can take whatever steps may be necessary in terms of planning and security?
I mean, this is not the way that these measures have been introduced or used, in my view. These measures have been introduced in the wake of legitimate protests for Palestine, and they've been introduced in an attempt to codify what is acceptable on university campuses. The restrictions on which words you can say on campus. On some campuses you can't say from the river to the sea. Even campuses outside of Queensland where that's banned on a state level now, and you can be arrested for saying from the river to the sea. But on other campuses, these words have been banned, or the word genocide has been banned, or the word intifada has been banned. I mean, these are not things that are primarily about protecting people. They are restricting our right to express opposition to Israel's assaults on Gaza.
Finally, could I just ask that Ms Johnson be shown Dr. Andy Smith's statement, and in particular the page _0026.
Yes.
Can we bring that up on the screen, please?
Perhaps while that's coming up, Ms Johnson, can I ask you a couple of questions just about your background? Did you grow up in a family that identified strongly as Jewish?
We talked about our background and our kind of history and so on. I went to a secular school, I went to a public school. So.
Do you have relatives who live in Israel?
I don't know.
when you were growing up, did you have an attachment to Israel in the sense of feeling some strong identification with Israel as the nation state of the Jews?
I never felt that. In fact, my mother went to Israel as a younger person and at the time felt that what Israel was doing was not right. She witnessed its oppression of Palestinians, and so no, I didn't feel that this was connected to my background.
Yeah. Sorry, Ms. Hager, you go on.
You see the second box on the page there, marked poster 5?
Yes.
Yes. And that is a Students for Palestine poster, is it?
It is, yes.
And you'll see what Dr. Schmidt has written there about this poster. Can I ask, were you involved in organising this event or putting this poster up?
I was. It was for context, it was a workshop that was held as part of the encampment with Dr. Rick Kuhn, who is a prominent Jewish academic, now retired from the ANU, whose work focuses on a Jewish activist who was part of the resistance in Poland. But this poster was put up to advertise that event.
Commissioner, I have no further. Sorry,
Sorry.
did you wish to add something about it?
Just one comment. I find the implication that this poster has something anti-Semitic about it offensive. The comment that it tells Jews what they should believe and feel. I mean, we have spent years as Jewish people, and then most of this Royal Commission, hearing that Jewish people should identify with the State of Israel, or that that's the majority position and should be accepted. The idea that then, when students put up a poster about the anti-Zionist tradition, which until very recently was a majority or very large current within Jewish opinion, that in itself is problematic because it tells Jewish students what to feel, I think is, I was quite shocked that this was actually raised as an example of anti-Semitism, to be honest. This is an attempt to discuss the genuine opposition of Jewish people to both the far right, who the poster is depicting, and to the State of Israel, which they believed could only end in an apartheid state, in an ethnically exclusive state, and there was mass opposition to that, the project of setting up Israel amongst anti-Zionist Jews.
Commissioner, I have no further questions. I understand there is an application to cross-examine
Yes.
Ms. Johnson by Ms. Crafty.
Yes, is that...
And that
no, let me just...
I believe that was granted earlier in the day.
There is from... Ms. Crafty?
The application was made and I had understood the application had been granted.
Yes, it has been.
Thank you.
Yes, do go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Johnson, my name is Gabby Crafty. I act for the 7 mainstream Jewish communal organisations, and this week also for the Australian Union of Jewish Students. Can I take you to some parts of your statement? Paragraph 6, you say, and sorry, I should just, before I go to paragraph 6, you've made your statement in a personal capacity, but also in your capacity, also on behalf of Students for Palestine, correct?
That's correct.
Paragraph 6, you've said you're an organiser of you were an organiser of the University of Sydney Gaza Solidarity Encampment in 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As well as the National Student Referendum on Palestine in 2025.
That's correct.
And at paragraph 7, you say Students for Palestine consists of student collectives on at least 21 campuses. We have over 1,000 members, but many thousands more students have been involved in our campus campaigns and city-based rallies. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, and we have been, immensely proud to have involved so many thousands of students in our activism. It's something we've seen more broadly. I was part of organising, the March Across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, where 300,000 people joined us. And on campuses, we have seen overwhelming support by young people for Palestine, and, genuinely mass participation in activist events.
Paragraph 9, you say Students for Palestine was the primary organiser of the vast majority of student Gaza solidarity encampments in 2024. You go on to say we've led student strikes and walkouts, coordinated the national student referendum for Palestine, and you also say you hosted the student general meetings.
That's correct.
Was some of the encampment activities also occupation of buildings and office spaces?
On some campuses, yes. The main thing Students for Palestine organised were the tent encampments.
But Students for Palestine were involved also in occupation of some buildings?
Are there specific reference?
Well, for example, the Arts West building at Melbourne University, were Students for Palestine involved in the occupation of that building?
We weren't involved in that occupation.
Paragraph 27, you say, in just a week, over 1,000 university academics signed onto an open letter supporting the encampments. Now, wasn't clear, but were Students for Palestine involved in assisting to bring that letter about?
From my recollection, we did not initiate this letter. It was initiated by academics themselves.
Was Students for Palestine involved in promoting it or perhaps posting about it on social media?
I believe that we were, and we certainly shared it around once it was in existence.
Do you have a large social media following?
We do on many of the campuses, and we have a National Students for Palestine page.
Does each campus have its own campus named Students for Palestine branch?
Not all campuses in the country, but a large number of campuses in the country have a specific Students for Palestine organisation, and they have their own social media associated with that.
Paragraph 32, you say over 150 submissions were received from 20 university campuses across the country. That was for the People's Inquiry into Campus Free Speech on Palestine?
Yes.
Paragraph 35, you say at the University of Queensland on the 29th of May 2024, over 1,500 students overwhelmingly voted in favour of severing ties with companies that supply the Israeli Defence Forces.
Yes.
And paragraph 36, you note there that you expressed how proud you felt to be among the more than 500 students gathered to vote in solidarity with Palestine.
Yes.
Ms Johnson, you're also the Education Officer of the National Union of Students, is that correct?
Yes, although I note that I don't appear in that capacity today.
No, but it's not in your statement, of course, that you hold that national role, but you do hold that national role in the Union of Students.
I do.
So it's fair to say that when you speak publicly, given all of the reach that you have, you speak with real reach and real influence over how a great many students think about issues. Do you agree with that?
Yes, and I've tried to use it to influence students to support Palestine.
In your statement, you describe your movement's Students for Palestine's primary focus as mobilising students in what you call peaceful protest and activist events.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And you describe the encampment movement itself as the peaceful encampment movement.
I do.
You've also said in your statement that Students for Palestine have always opposed all forms of racism and discriminatory behaviour, including anti-Semitism.
That's true.
And that your movement's manifesto commits you to standing, quote, alongside Jewish people against discrimination.
Yes.
And that you yourself, as you've told the Commission, ever experienced or witnessed a single instance of anti-Semitism at the encampments that you helped organise?
I didn't witness that. I was at Sydney University and I didn't witness an instance of anti-Semitism.
So your evidence to the Commission is that Students for Palestine is tolerant and opposed to discrimination in all of its forms?
That's true.
And you say that criticism of any state is a fundamental tenet of free speech?
That's correct.
You've told the Commission today, Ms Johnson, that we are the ones calling for the end of violence. Do you recall giving that evidence?
Yes.
Do you recall Ms Johnson having given an address last year at the Socialist Alternatives Socialism 2025 conference in Sydney?
I do recall giving that address, yes.
Was it on about the 16th or 17th of August last year?
Sounds approximately right.
And the title of the speech you gave was Socialist Strategy to Liberate Palestine.
That's correct.
In that speech you said, so to put that totally clearly, it means that Israel cannot continue to exist. Do you recall saying that?
I do, and I did so in the context of also saying it is a state that is premised on the destruction, the systematic destruction of Palestine.
You said in the speech a little later, as socialists, we support the right of the oppressed to fight back against their oppressors, and that includes the right to use violence in basically every single fight around the world. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
You also told your audience, then there's Hamas itself. So I think they're kind of championed in particular because of October 7th in 2023. But they're quite there's a word missing I think in the transcript, but they're quite a reactionary organisation when you look at them. They're bourgeois, nationalist, capitalist, anti-worker and a deeply authoritarian party.
Yes.
And they have actually a strategy towards Palestine which has given up on the full liberation of Palestine. So they've made pragmatic deals with imperialist regimes in Israel itself. And then in terms of that idea of all of Palestine should belong to Palestinians and people of any race or religion should be able to live in this land. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
That conference took place in a building called the Home Building, is that correct?
Yes.
And that building is at the University of Sydney?
It is at the University of Sydney.
Do you still say to this Commission, pardon me, that Students for Palestine are the ones who stand against violence?
Yes. The violence going on in the world today is, in terms of Palestine, is being carried out by Israel on an extreme scale. I mean, there have been 70,000 people killed in the last 2 and a bit years. There is a new report by the United Nations that finds that there has been systematic use of violence, including sexual violence, against Palestinian children. That is the violence that is going on right now. I'm for a world where that violence of colonial regimes occupying the land of another people and carrying out genocide and ethnic cleansing, I'm for a world where that violence no longer exists. So, yes.
But violence is okay if it's perpetrated against Israel. Is that right?
I think the resistance of people against colonisation has always involved elements of both mass non-violence and also violent resistance. I think it's hard to believe that there would be a contention that slaves did not have the right to use violence when opposing slaveholders, that there would be a contention that the struggle of black South Africans against apartheid was somehow wrong because it was not perfectly non-violent, it's violent in every instance, that the Vietnam War resistance movement of the Vietnamese people was somehow problematic in opposition to the world's largest imperialist regime carrying out campaigns of mass murder and targeting of Vietnamese citizens, that those people should have quietly and peacefully only held up signs in opposition to their own oppression.
Ms Johnson, I'm sorry, Ms Crafty, if I can just interrupt for a moment. I'm not sure that the transcript has got you correctly. At the beginning of that answer, the transcript records you saying, I think the resistance of people against colonisation has always involved elements of both mass violence and also violent resistance. Is that what you said?
Sorry, mass non-violence.
Yes, thank you. Yes, do go on, Ms Crafty.
Thank you. Ms Johnson, you've agreed that you have told the Commission that you and Students for Palestine are tolerant and opposed to discrimination in all its forms, and that you stand alongside Jewish people against discrimination. We call that evidence. Whether you agree with them or not, most Australian Jews do believe that Israel has a right to exist. Do you accept that that is a fact?
I accept that as a fact. Personally, I find it sad, and I'm proud to be part of the growing numbers of anti-Zionist Jewish people around the world.
Yes, but you accept that most Australian Jews do believe Israel has a right to exist?
Yes, alongside many other non-Jewish people.
Yes. And some of those Jewish people who believe that Israel has a right to exist sometimes are critical of governments of the day in Israel.
I accept that that's the case, although I think the problem that I was trying to get at in this speech is that the Israeli state itself is founded on the ethnic cleansing and dispossession of Palestinians.
Now, for the Jews to whom I've just referred, Israel forms a part of their Jewish identity. You accept that?
I accept that they see it as part of their Jewish identity.
And they're entitled to that belief, aren't they, that Israel has a right to exist?
I think that that's the premise that Israel should exist is a racist premise, because at its foundation, Israel involved the creation of Israel involved the expulsion of, by UN estimates, some 700,000 people in order to create a Jewish majority state. That is a racist act. I don't believe any ethno-state which denies rights to those non-Jews, should be supported, and that I don't believe that that's a morally right claim, that should be supported.
So that I can be clear, are you saying that you say that Jews who believe that Israel has a right to exist are not entitled to hold that belief?
I believe that we live in a democracy and people are entitled to hold their beliefs, but it is not my responsibility to say that those views are correct. In fact, it is my right to oppose those views when I see them as discriminatory and racist.
Do you accept that a Jewish student or an academic on an Australian campus who holds the belief that Israel has a right to exist would find it confronting, to say the least, to hear a prominent, well-known student leader say in a public speech on campus that Israel, quote, cannot continue to exist, and advocating publicly in favour of violent resistance?
I think if students go to a university and complete a degree, or if people work as academics, it would be a failure of our education system if they never felt challenged on any of their views, particularly when those views involved support for a state which is, as I've said, carrying out genocide, but also fundamentally oppresses Palestinians.
Given that everything that you and I have discussed in this cross-examination, including your own reach and influence over many students across at least 21 campuses, your own words that Israel cannot continue to exist, your advocacy of the right to use violence in basically every single fight around the world, do you understand why Jewish students and academics who believe that Israel has a right to exist do not feel safe or welcome on campus?
I think our campuses should be spaces of anti-racism, and that people who attend them who have racist views, which involve support for apartheid states, which are carrying out genocide, should be challenged on those views. And I think it is a fundamental part of freedom of speech and freedom of expression that we have the ability to challenge those views on campus, whether or not they feel what other people feel confronted by that challenging. I have a feeling, what kind of world am I living in where a genocide can be carried out, and what happens is that there are calls for muzzling our national broadcasters to say that they can't speak accurately about this event. I have a view that the universities have been curtailing free speech, and I think we should have the right, and our media should have the right, and our politicians should actually stand up to what is happening and speak about the genocide that's going on in Gaza, which has been denied repeatedly. And I think, you know, that's a fundamental part of our free speech. And so I don't think that that's threatening. I think it's standing up for justice.
Thank you, Ms Johnson.
Dr. Hanscom?
Thank you, Commissioner. There's a few things arising from Ms Crafty's examination.
Yes.
You remember being taken by Ms Crafty a moment ago to your speech made in August last year, I think.
Yes.
Some selective passages were read. You remember it being read to you, Palestinians have the right to resist violently, but the question is what can win and what actually takes a step in the right direction. What was not read to you was this. And I think the reality is, when you look at the past couple of years, that the kind of armed struggle of Hamas has basically had nothing to do with liberation for Palestine. Firstly, because of the nature of armed struggle itself. So armed struggle alone has failed repeatedly to liberate Palestine. The October 7 attack on Israel has not led to some step forward for Palestinians. Do you still hold that view?
I hold that view. I'm not a political supporter of Hamas, but nor am I here to condemn the actions of people who have been placed in a concentration camp by Israel for decades.
But you also describe Hamas as actually having a strategy towards Palestine which has given up on the full liberation of Palestine. Is that still your view?
That's my view. I support a land of genuine democracy and freedom for all people, regardless of race or religion, in the entirety of the region. And so I think the point I was making in the speech is that strategies which fall short of that, are not enough.
I seek to tender this statement. I don't have a document ID for it because I only learned this morning that it was to be the subject of cross-examination, but I'm sure that with counsel assisting we can work out a document ID.
Yes, I'm sure that's so, and I see Ms Hager nodding. So, and Ms Hager even has the ability to allocate it a number.
I already have, Commissioner. It's
Splendid.
lew.599.0001.002. That is the transcript of the speech that's just been examined on.
Yes, I'm very grateful to counsel assisting.
Thank you, Dr Hanscom. Ms Hager, anything arising?
Nothing arising, Commissioner.
No. Thank you, Ms Johnson. You are excused.
Thank you.